Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your calls. You might think we live in a country where it is illegal to discriminate against people based on their skin color, and that's only partially true, because apparently some kinds of discrimination are actually embraced by the woke and the politically correct, who say we should discriminate against white people. But we shouldn't discriminate against people of color. So they have to have double standards. It leads me to believe that they are liberals, because liberals need double standards or they wouldn't have any standards at all. And now it turns out that universities, which have always been centers of indoctrination for your kids, and usually at your expense as a taxpayer, although sometimes there are private universities that do it even more so than the public universities, I want to talk about one of those. And I've invited Matt Lamb on, who's associate editor for the College Fix, to talk about Pacific University here in Oregon. Matt, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
So tell me about the federal civil rights complaint filed against Pacific University.
Yeah, so Mark Perry, who's a former University of Michigan Flint professor, and now he's basically a full-time activist, he filed a federal complaint with the Department of Education because Pacific University has a number of events that basically exclude white people, white professors, and white students. And so the Office for Civil Rights has actually opened up an investigation into this. These are different events that, like a BIPOC staff and faculty hoopla is one of them. Another one is a BIPOC, of course, means Black, Indigenous, people of color mentorship program that is only open to, let's just say, racial minorities to make it easier. And so this is, sounds like a pretty clear violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which says that if you receive federal funds, you cannot discriminate on the basis of race.
So what's the university's response? I mean, maybe they haven't responded yet because you filed the complaint January 25, but you cited these 6 different examples. And I'll tell you, Matt, not to diminish your case, but almost every day I'm hearing about cases where public schools, K-12 schools, universities, even employers are saying, we're only going to hire somebody who is from an embattled minority, or they have various ways of phrasing it. But they're basically using code words to say, don't apply if you're white. Whites need not apply. And that, like you, I'm not a lawyer, but I look at that and I think, well, that violates federal law. It violates state law. As you said, violates Title VI. How do they think they're going to get away with this?
Absolutely. So what happens a lot of times is this investigation will be opened, and then the university will take down the program, they'll scrub their website, or they'll make it open to all people. And I think they think they're going to get away with it because they think no one will catch them, or they think that they have an exception to the rule. Mark Perry has said that he's filed something like over 700 of these complaints, either on race or sex, which is another one, like, women in STEM type programs that are closed off to men. So I think they think they're going to get away with it. It's one of those things, kind of a game. If there's thousands of universities and there's only a couple people in groups that focus on these issues, it's sort of a game of chance of, is anyone really going to catch us? Because the Department of Education, as you said, there's plenty of examples, does not really appear to be proactive in finding these forms of discrimination. So it's only when someone brings it to their attention, which then creates a public record, and so that kind of forces them to do something about it.
Well, let me ask you if there's another way to go about it, slightly different. But, Mark, most of the universities, both public and private, have to be accredited in some way. If you're not an accredited university, your diploma isn't worth much, either for going on to more education, or if you say, I've got a degree from a useless university that's not accredited, that's a problem. Do the accreditation agencies have anything to say about this? And is that a way to go after this problem, since it is happening so often and in so many universities? Because then if you say, hey, if you've got any programs that openly discriminate against people based on race, religion, national origin, sex or gender, et cetera, then you're not going to get accreditation. That would go after all of them at once, wouldn't it?
Well, first of all, I would just say that a lot of accredited universities also have useless degrees. I get your point.
And I would agree. I would agree with you about that.
Yeah, it's a great point. I've actually never thought about that, but I think that would seem like an easy way to root a lot of this out. If every time they went accreditation, every couple of years, I'm not sure how often it happens, there was actually like an audit of all of your programs and do any exclude on the basis of race or sex. I would actually say particularly for an accreditor or an insurer, let's say, that is a huge liability of lawsuits. So I would think universities would want to avoid that, and I could see how that would play into accreditation, because I do believe a lot of these accreditors, particularly with private universities, take into account their financial solvency, because basically if a student enrolls his freshman year, his degree is worthless if he can't finish his senior year because the school goes bankrupt. So I do think that would be one avenue that perhaps activists could consider. A lot of these agencies are woke. A lot of these accreditors are woke. So, there might have to be something else from a legal perspective to force them to enforce the law as well.
Yeah, Matt, there's a lot of that wokeness stuff going on. But you just sparked another idea, and let me throw this one at you. You mentioned insurance companies. So even if you're a state institution, you may carry insurance through a private company. Can you imagine if some group, a conservative group that doesn't believe in discriminating based on race or any of those other characteristics, like so many liberals do, if you were to buy 5 shares of the top 10 insurance companies that provide insurance for universities, public or private, and show up at their investor meetings and say, do you insure any institutions that discriminate based on race? And because that seems like a liability, it seems like it'd increase claims and you'd have a lot of legal costs. And when they say, well, we really don't know, you say, okay, here are 10 of the universities you insure, and here are some of their policies that sound like they overtly discriminate, and bring it up at a shareholder meeting and see what the board of directors of, I don't know, name an insurance company would say about that. Say, well, gosh, we're going to check into that and we'll cut those people off right away.
Absolutely. The problem is there haven't been enough lawsuits with damages against universities that go through, because a lot of these schools kind of back down. But I would imagine, and this might be happening with free speech litigation, that eventually that would be the way to go, because conservative groups, center-right groups, have been very successful in free speech litigation. Groups like ADF, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And I would bet that some insurers are worried about damages now. There was a Supreme Court case a few years ago that made it easier to sue if your free speech rights were violated and to win damages. So perhaps something similar would need to happen, because all universities, no matter how leftist they are ultimately capitalists worried about their bottom line at the end of the day.
Well, and the other thing is, especially for smaller public or private universities like Pacific, you might say, well, who's on your board of directors? Well, usually the board of trustees or board of chancellors or whatever they call them in a particular university case. Most of them are local people who are in business or they're in some other field. Can you imagine what happened if, because I've tried to get trustees on to say, how can you as a trustee vote effectively to endorse the university doing this? You couldn't do it in your private business. I mean, if a private business said, we're hiring waiters and waitresses for our restaurants, but you only have to apply if you're a person of color, don't bother applying if you're white, we won't hire you, and ask them, would you get away with that in your business? Then why are you as a trustee signing off on that same kind of nonsense when it comes to, to the university where you sit on the board of trustees? Make them confront it. I think most of them just avoid it. That's why I can't remember the last time I had a university trustee on the program, but it'd be fun to ask them the question and then say, if you can't defend it in your own business, in your own activities in the community, how in the world can you defend it as a trustee of XYZ University? That's Matt Lamb, who's the associate editor for the College Fix. Matt, thanks very much.